A hulking mass that belied the owner's intelligence slowly made its way towards the settlements just outside his declared territory. A mix of anger and something akin to shame swelling in the creature's mind. It had been attacked, not by any predator, but by round-headed, faceless invaders that hurled silent blazing light from something held in their hands, and loud steeds with round spinning feet. Perhaps if it had known they were coming, or realized their presence earlier, it would not have ended up in such a state, and as the apex predator of the region being driven from his home and hunted, were foreign concepts that defied understanding. Yet this is what it had come to. It fled from these hunters, and without thinking, the direction it chose to run was towards the settlements, towards the humans. It was only just keeping ahead of those who wished it harm. Several bloody holes made by weapons that burned through its scaled hide, and limping badly as it trekked forward. Its subconscious choice of direction seemed the right one, as it heard the sounds of pursuit fade. Not completely, but something seemed to give them pause, and the creature wasn't going to just let the opportunity pass. But why had it chosen this direction? Why did some part of it feel like the humans would help? Even the idea felt preposterous. How could those small, frail beings help it? When they first showed up, the creature thought they might be new competitors, but surprisingly they appeared to be aware of what land it had claimed as its own. It had seen them from a distance as it patrolled its borders, and the reactions were always that of terror and panic when it allowed itself to be seen. They were amusing and harmless, and not enough meat in them to make it worth hunting them, even if it didn't already have ample prey. No. Wait. There was one human who was different. As it trudged on, it found its mind wandering, maybe as a way to distract from the pain. A young offspring of a pair of humans who raised prey animals. The parents allowed their animals to graze just outside the border of its territory, with sturdy fence, more meant to keep them in than it out. But that offspring, it had seen them once when they first learned to walk. Honestly, how had their species survived with how long it took to learn something so basic? It had accomplished the same feat within hours of its own birth. Yet, when this weak runt laid eyes on it, instead of reacting with panic and running off on its wobbly legs, it just stood there. Not frozen in fear. The creature knew more than well enough what that looked like. No, this had been different. There was something like curiosity, but stronger in its eyes. Wonder, perhaps? Whatever it was, it finally snapped the little one out of their trance and compelled it to move towards the creature. It had been just as surprised, if not more, than the male parent, who seemed to appear from out of nowhere to scoop up the offspring before they could reach the fence and back away from it, a much more familiar look of wariness and apprehension adorning his face. Eyes locked on it as he took slow steps away, the young offspring in his arms cried out in protest and reached out as if trying to touch the creature, even as the parent made efforts to both calm and quiet them out of concern that they would draw any more of his attention and interest. Eventually, the parent had created enough distance that it tucked the offspring to his chest and fully turned around, bursting into a sprint back to their den. If the creature hadn't still been shaking off its stunned confusion at the action of the young human, it might have noted that despite only having 2 legs, it seemed humans could run quite quickly when needed. Time passed, and there were more encounters, though none as close as the first. But the look in the small human's eyes never changed, and they would even wave their upper limbs around as if wanting to make sure the creature could see them. Each time, the creature had to wonder just how they were being raised, freely and gladly exposing themselves to significant danger for no good reason. But if they didn't intrude into their territory, they saw no reason to be the one to teach them the consequences of their poor upbringing. The memories blurred, and the pain brought his mind back to the present as it approached the fence that had passed along so many times, watching the little human grow over the years. It hadn't seen them for a long while now, it realized, as it forced its way between the posts, the moderate shocks delivered by the wires strung between them, nothing compared to the agony it was already in, so it continued pushing until they snapped and it was able to drag itself into the grazing area. It didn't get far before its legs finally gave out, the blood loss catching up with it at last. It saw light spring to life in the human den, and soon enough, a figure moving at that surprising swift speed made their way towards it. The little human, but not so little anymore. Still small, but closer to the way all full-grown humans were compared to it. They slid to a stop in front of it with that same look in their eyes, but this time mixed with concern. They shouted something it couldn't understand over their shoulder, presumably to their parents, before speaking in hushed, calming tones, and very cautiously reaching out a hand to stroke across an undamaged section of its hide. Their mouth was upturned in what the creature recognized as an expression of happiness, yet their cheeks were wet with moisture from their eyes in what it knew to be sadness. Even now, it couldn't understand this human. Then it heard it, the sound of the hunters and their steeds. Weakly turning its head, it saw them ride through the gap it had made in the fence and come to a stop nearby, pointing whatever it was that had injured it at it again. Only for the little human to rise to their feet and stand between them. What was it doing? These hunters had hurt it to such an extent, so they must know that there's nothing they could do against them. So why? Even the hunters seemed confused, and seemed to try and get them to move out of the way. A request which they emphatically refused, much to the clear annoyance of the leader. After a few more exchanges, the hunters shifted their aim towards the little human, and without thinking, the creature tried to move and draw their attention back to it, but it simply couldn't muster the strength. But it needn't have worried, as it saw another figure rapidly approaching. The male parent, the fur around his practically non-existent muzzle now flecked with grey, and an expression of utter rage unmistakable on his face. As he got closer, he raised his arm to the sky and called forth fire and thunder from his hand, the sound and sight creating more than enough of a distraction to let him stand in front of his offspring, the item in his hand levelled at the intruders. "Mind telling me why you were aiming plasma rifles at my daughter?" The creature couldn't understand what was being said, but it knew its fate depended on how this exchange went, so it fought against the pull of unconsciousness for as long as it could. "Look, we don't have a problem with you or your daughter. We were just tracking this thing, and it happened to come this way. So if you'd be so kind as to tell her to step aside, we can finish it off and get both us and it out of your hair." The male parent looked back at the smaller human, who shook their head defiantly, earning a bit of a sigh from the parent, but his expression hardened as he looked back at the hunters. "Doesn't look like that's gonna happen. Besides, don't you lot know that poaching's illegal in these parts?" The leader of the hunters grew even more annoyed, but still tried to reason with the parent. "Look, you can't feel safe with something like this out there. Wouldn't you feel safer knowing it's not out there ready to eat your livestock, or maybe something more important?" "I never had a problem with it till you decided to mess around tonight. And the way I see it, between a big beast who don't know no better, and a bunch of wannabe badasses who know damn well what a fence is, and still chose to come onto my property without my permission, I know which I want gone more. You're making a big mistake. Only mistake round here is you thinking plasma rifles were a good choice for hunting, when clearly none of you are decent shots. 1.5 second charge time, and I'm willing to bet that's how you managed to let this guy get away. It's a whole lot of firepower, and they're dead quiet, but it don't mean jack if you can't land your first shot and wind up scaring off your prey. I'm surprised you managed to hurt it as bad as you did, and I'd be more surprised if I don't get at least 3 of you before any of you land one anywhere close to me or mine, if you feel like ignoring my polite suggestion of getting the hell off my land in the next 30 seconds. The creature was barely hanging on, and just when there was a rush of movement, its vision blurred, and darkness finally took it. When it woke up, it was still in the field, but the pain it was in was greatly reduced, and the sun was high in the sky. It tried to move, but felt restricted, and the little human suddenly burst into view, waving their appendages to try and tell it to stop. Looking down at itself, it saw its wounds had been wrapped in some kind of white material, and the bleeding had stopped. Looking around, it saw the male parent nearby, standing guard a few feet away from his offspring. He wasn't treating the creature as an active threat, but there was a constant wariness in his eyes, and his hand rested on the fire and thunder at his hip. The rest of the day was a bit of a blur, as it fell back to sleep between meals. The little human prepared for it to recover its strength. At one point, it awoke in the middle of the night to find the offspring missing, and the parent still there, though his gaze wasn't trained on the creature now, but on the fence. The human clearly wasn't happy with the arrangement, but it seemed he couldn't refuse his young's wishes, and that meant standing guard over it. It seemed the previous night hadn't ended with violence, but he thought it might not be the last time the hunters would try their luck. Fortunately, that possibility never came to be, and over the next few weeks the creature eventually regained its health, and it was permanently released from the restrictive material the little human had regularly changed out for new ones every few days. They had grown more and more bold over the course of their time together, going from tentative pats and strokes across its scaly hide, to scratching under its chin and giving it kisses on the head, much to the obvious anxiety and stress of the male parent. But it was time for the creature to return to its territory, and the little human clearly knew it, wearing the same smile of happiness, while shedding contradictory tears of sadness like they had on that first night. The parent muttered what it assumed were expressions of comfort, as it suddenly made its way back towards the hole it had made in the fence. But before it could leave, the little human ran up to it once more, and flung its upper limbs around it in what it recognized as an embrace, another display of affection among the humans. After a few long moments, it rested its chin on top of their head, and gently let out something akin to a tiger's chuff, but accentuated with a hiss. Another couple moments, and the male parent called out, finally causing the little human to let go, and allow the creature to disappear back into the trees, but not before turning back one last time, rearing back in its haunches, and waving its front legs at the offspring, earning a squeal of delight it would remember for the rest of its life. Besides, it wasn't like this was goodbye forever. They would see each other again, from opposite sides of the fence.